Hello, and welcome to the International News Daily Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Before we begin, I want to remind you to like and subscribe to our channel to stay in the loop and for us to open up a greater discussion on the global affairs affecting the world today. Today is going to be another special report, though we're going to focus on an actual issue that is occurring today. Today marks the beginning of the trials for the perpetrators and planners of the 2015 Islamic terrorist attacks on Paris, specifically the ones that occurred on the Bataclan Theater and the National Football Stadium in the Paris suburb of Saint-Denis. We're going to start with some historical background and go into the trial itself, which is actually going to be the largest trial in French history. In 2015, members of the Islamic State, specifically a cell based in Brussels, Belgium, began to plan out terrorist attacks following the 2015 January Charlie Hebdo attacks that also occurred in France. Keep in mind, France was already on high alert following the other separate terrorist attacks that occurred at the beginning of the year in January on the Charlie Hebdo newspaper, which published a picture of Muhammad and received those terrorist attacks as a sign of retaliation, and a kosher market. France was already on high alert. And keep in mind that Europe was already in the middle of a massive migration crisis of immigrants coming in from specifically Iraq and Syria. During this time, this cell of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL or Daesh, however you want to call them, as I've said before, I prefer Daesh, began to plan what they intended to be the largest terrorist attacks ever carried out on European Union soil. Luckily, the attacks were not that large, but not that luckily. The attacks were still massive, and they are the largest attacks on France to have ever occurred since World War II, and the largest attacks since the Madrid bombings in 2004. The attackers killed 130 people and injured hundreds more. A total of 9 gunmen and suicide bombers would attack separate locations in a coordinated manner. Of these 9 gunmen and attackers, only 1 survived. And the reason this individual, known as Saleh Abdel-Salam, survived was because his suicide vest, which he intended to go off, was simply malfunctioning. Because of this malfunction, Abdel-Salam would flee back into Belgium, into Brussels, his hometown, and hide out in Brussels. Police would eventually find this individual and the person who planned and coordinated the attacks, an ISIL heavyweight known as Abdelhamid Aboud. Abdelhamid would go full jihad and die in an exchange of fire with French police. Today, what remains of the people and the cell that planned these horrible attacks that killed many and maimed even more remain only 20 of these attackers and planners. These 20 individuals are going to begin facing trial in what I mentioned before is going to be France's largest legal case in history. It's so large, in fact, that inside the Palais de Justice, or the Palace of Justice, which is in the middle of France on the Île de la Cité, the island in the middle of France, they had to build a entirely new, massive courtroom, which can fit 150 people inside it. 550 people. 550 people can be fit inside this courtroom. The case is so large that it includes 20 defendants, almost 1,800 plaintiffs, including victims, family members of victims, and those affected psychologically by the terrorist attacks. In addition to this, there will be 330 lawyers representing both sides, the plaintiffs and the defendants. By far, one of the largest legal cases in world history. In addition to the main courtroom, there will be many other spillover rooms to be able to house the public and other journalists. Now, recording for the public is not allowed. In fact, recording in general, even for archival purposes, is illegal under French law. However, it has been allowed in a very small amount of specific historically important cases. Those including the cases of people connected to alleged Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, Rwandan genocidaires, and Nazi officials, including Klaus Barbie. In France, trials are only recorded for archival and historical purposes. This trial will also be recorded. However, the videos will not be available to the public. What will, however, be available and is allowed is filming which is occurring outside of the courtroom, which is a massive logistical operation. Keep in mind that what is being tried is one of the largest terrorist attacks to occur on Western soil, with a massive amount of defendants. There are multiple checkpoints, from my understanding at least 5, which each party has to pass through to ensure that no other equipment, weapons, or materials are brought in to carry out another terrorist attack, which for the Islamic State, who has become significantly more active following the US withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, would be a symbolic attack to carry out on the Palace of Justice, which is a historical French place that has carried out justice for many famous historical figures, including Marie Antoinette and Émile Zola. Now that we're speaking of the defendants, we're going to go a little bit more into detail of these 20 individuals. Now, of these 20 people that are on trial, only 14 will actually physically be present. 6 are going to be tried in absentia. 5 are presumed to be dead. 1 individual and suspect's whereabouts are completely unknown, with most officials assuming that he is somewhere in the former territories of ISIS, so either in Iraq or Syria currently. The trial is going to take about 9 months and is planned to go in such a way that the first part of the trial is going to follow police and forensic evidence of the attacks, the technical evidence. Following this, victims are going to give their eyewitness testimony. After the victims of the attacks have given their eyewitness testimony, officials such as police officers and other police commanders are going to give their testimony. In addition to this, what is also very fascinating, French president at the time, François Hollande, is going to also testify during this trial at the time that has been slotted for the officials. After French officials have given their testimonies, what's going to follow is statements by the victims' family members. Finally, the defendants are going to have an opportunity to give testimonies themselves, and they will be cross-examined and questioned on the chronology of the attacks, the planning of the attacks, the carrying out of the attacks, and what followed after. Finally, there is going to be a psychological evaluation of each single defendant. And at the end, closing arguments are going to be made. Every single defendant, except Abdeslam Salah, is being charged with conspiracy to carry out a terrorist attack. Salah is being charged with murder. Every single defendant is facing the harshest punishment possible under the French judicial system, which is a life sentence. This is a highly politicized trial and is going to be very difficult to try fairly. That being said, these individuals allegedly, though most likely, carried out one of the most monstrous and heinous attacks in the history of the West regarding Islamic terrorism. These 20 individuals helped plan, helped perpetrate, and helped orchestrate the killing of 130 people and the injuring of many more. This same cell that carried out the attacks in France in November of 2015 for what they are being tried for now would go on to just a few months later initiate another series of terrorist attacks in Belgium, Brussels, killing 32 more people. The reason these attacks occurred in the first place, the Islamic State stated that it was retaliation for French airstrikes against ISIS targets. At the time, President Francois Hollande actually responded by creating the largest form of airstrikes against ISIS, creating even more violence. What these individuals did is historically bad. They took away many lives, many sons, many daughters, many wives, mothers, husbands that will never be returned again. But what can be had is justice. And what is important politically and historically is for the West to show and state that any form of terrorism is unacceptable in today's society and will be heavily prosecuted. And there will also be heavy reactions. That's our story for today. Comment what you think about the trials. Comment how you think the verdicts are going to be. Comment if you believe the trials are going to be fair. Again, subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Have a good day.